Welcome to this episode of the B2B Marketers on a Mission podcast, and I'm your host, Christian Klepp. Today, I'll be talking to Brynna DeSantiago. She is a B2B SaaS marketing executive and the head of marketing at Encapture, where she leads the team on strategic marketing campaigns, digital advertising, and marketing events. She also works closely with the Encapture revenue team to close pipeline through account-based marketing initiatives. Tune in to find out more about what this B2B Marketers mission is. Okay, I'm going to say Brynna DeSantiago, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Christian.
Great to have you on the show, Brynna, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I think it's something that comes up a lot in the world of B2B marketing. There are few that have actually mastered the art of implementing this effectively and generating the right results. So I'm looking forward to see where this little chat of ours takes us.
Agreed. Thank you.
All right, fantastic. So let's dive right in. So Brynna, you're on a mission to partner with business leaders to beat revenue goals, I'm going to say through hyper-targeted in-person events and at-scale demand gen and go-to-market efforts. So for this conversation, why don't we zero in on the following topic, which is how to leverage in-person events as part of your B2B marketing strategy. So let's kick off the conversation with two questions, and I'm happy to repeat them, all right? So question number one is, why do you think that in-person events can be an accelerator for deals? And number two, as it pertains to events, where do you see many marketing teams fall flat?
Great questions. To address the first one there, why are in-person events so important and effective right now? I think with COVID and the era of Zoom, we definitely over-index to virtual meetings, virtual events, which is great. They work for a lot of things. They worked for us during that time period, and they do work moving forward. But there's been this feeling and this need to, for people to get back out there. And once you get in person with somebody, nothing moves the needle more than a 30-minute conversation. Sometimes when you've been trying to track somebody down for months and months. So I think we're in this era of, after over-indexing to virtual events for years and years, everybody is ready to get back in person. And nothing really is more effective than having that in-person, face-to-face conversation. To follow up there, where I think in general a lot of marketing teams fall short for events is I think a lot of marketing teams tend to do 2/3 or 3/4 of the way there planning events, whether that's, you plan the event, you get the trade show, you invite the people, but we just miss that last little quarter piece, which is what really gets people to the event, like whatever that hook is or whatever that outreach is. And sometimes the marketing teams tend to fall short where we check our boxes, we've made the landing page, we've have the registration page, we've sent the emails, etc. But there's nothing juicy in there that makes makes a prospect or a customer actually want to attend this event. So I think that's where typically we see people falling short.
It's kind of like the cookie cutter approach, right? So we've done the email blast, check. We're directing everybody to this landing page for them to register, check. And to your point, there's nothing really that they come up with that jumps out, right? And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, in the world of B2B, people tend to be really guilty of just trying not to do anything that's too crazy.
100%. It's, this is the way we've done it. So let's continue to go to events or build event roadmap the same way we have in our template. And, let's follow the marketing roadmap of, like you said, setting up the registration page, sending out emails, directing them there. And, once they hit that, we'll send them a post-event email, and, following that, everybody knows that cadence, that event Bible. But it's, the extra little bit is, partnering with sales, getting that juicy information that people actually want to come to that event for, making sure that outreach is effective, making sure it's on the right channels, etc.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we're going to unpack that bit later on in the conversation. But I did have one follow-up question for you, Brynna, just based on what you've been saying the past couple of minutes. And it might be difficult to quantify this, but maybe part of the reason why a lot of people have defaulted to the virtual events and Zoom is partly also because of the cost factor. So how do you I guess from your experience, that clearly plays a role in terms of like companies making decisions about whether to do in person or virtual events. How can marketers overcome that barrier? Because that is a big one, right? I mean, if you're talking about like attending a trade show, for example, right? Those aren't
Hmm.
understatement of the year. Those aren't cheap.
Correct. I would say we there's this idea that all events are expensive, and you're right. Signing up for a trade show is never cheap. You pay for the booth, you pay for travel, you pay for the swag. On top of that, it's hard to do that. Under 10K, for example. But there are events, that are local and smaller scale that I think a lot of people forget about. Creating more intimate moments, whether that's, I know that I have one customer located in Austin, and I know that I have one prospect in Austin, and I have two sales reps in Austin. Like a 4 to 10 person dinner is considered an in-person event, and hosting, more smaller scale things that fall into a really doable budget is like a more bite-sized way that I approach that, because again, anytime that you can get one of your customers who loves you guys talking to one of your prospect, doesn't matter where they're at, whether that's over drinks or at a dinner, and you're spending, you could spend a small amount on that tab. So I think thinking about events as less of this monster of an item to tackle, and thinking of them as more as bite sized. But also, like you said, with the cost, I think it's all about, where the budget comes from, obviously. And I personally would love to spend more of my money to go to an in-person and be face to face than, for example, on ads. So there's things where, obviously the give and take, and understanding where that in-person like ROI comes from, and having that be part of the budget strategy, I think is a huge conversation point.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm going to move us on to the next question, which is about, well, key pitfalls that marketers should avoid, and what should they be doing instead?
I think going back to budget,
Mm,
that's one of the biggest pitfalls. Either we say, okay, we're going to a trade show, and we have, this huge chunk of budget, let's blow it on this trade show. And sometimes we, overspend at events where you didn't need to do, a full platinum sponsorship that includes X, Y, and Z. Potentially having a small booth and doing a more low impact event could have been just as, impactful for your team. So I think the consideration is, like I said, not thinking that events in this one swim lane. Oh, an event is going to a trade show and spending 100K on a booth. I think that's what everyone's first thought is, and how can you be super strategic and technical and kind of scrappy with it, because there's ways to attend multiple events a year, have a small booth, a small presence. Sometimes you don't even need to have a booth if you're sponsoring different items, within the event. So I think it's the biggest pitfall is either spending too over indexing and spending too much on one event and just not being strategic and wasteful with that, or thinking you don't have enough money to spend event when you just have, 5, 10K for one event this quarter. And thinking that's not enough to get, a couple people in the room. So being more strategic of like, where are those, who are the people we need this quarter, this year? Do we need to get our customers talking with our prospects? Do we need to get our prospects talking with our product team to understand our product more? Like, who do we really need to get together in the same room? And let's work backwards from there and be as strategic with the spend as possible.
those are definitely some great insights. And I had another follow up question for you, or let me rephrase that. I want to dig a little bit deeper into the pitfalls, right? Just from your own observation, and I've heard this from like multiple people that I've interviewed on this show. I've seen it myself as I've gone to trade shows and events. Do you feel that post pandemic, people coming out of the pandemic and what have you, many of them have reverted to, I'm just going to say, the same bad habits when it comes to events somehow? Like there were tactics that were already in place at conferences and trade shows that were probably not, well, there was room for improvement there. And you'd feel that as we were going through the pandemic and things became more digitized or there were more virtual events, one would assume that there would have been some kind of natural evolution especially in the event space. But then sometimes, but I did notice that coming out of it, some people have still reverted back to, well, I'll just give you an example, right? So it's not so nebulous. Cold calling everybody that leaves their details at the booth, right? Things of that nature. Have you noticed any of that?
Yeah, I think, and I agree with you. It's kind of funny. You'd think we would have progressed
Yeah,
post COVID or, realized what didn't work for us and leave it in the past. But to a certain extent, some of that stuff, people are doing it because it does work. Like, whatever that percentage of, cold calling everyone who dropped their business card or cold calling everybody who's attending and, trying to get them to pick the pen up at your booth. Um, I think to a certain extent, some of those business tactics still work. So that's why they're being done. But it's less about whether it's working and more about like cutting through the noise. And if everybody is getting cold calls, spammed by emails, I saw a recent LinkedIn post about using socks as swag and how some people still love the socks and some people hate the socks. But if the socks get the people to stop by your booth and it works for your audience and you have meaningful conversations with your prospects that lead to a meeting because of the socks, lean into the socks. So I think there's ways to be disruptive and break those patterns. But if some of those patterns are still working and prospects are reacting to them in a positive way, I think it's a sign to lean in. But how do you lean in uniquely and differently, not like all the other vendors?
absolutely, absolutely. Okay, here comes another question, and you brought it up earlier on in the conversation about being able to stand out somehow and position perhaps even your company or the event differently, right? Because as you said, marketers, especially in the B2B space, we're kind of guilty of like just following this checklist and just ticking off all these boxes. So, just from your experience, and feel free to bring up examples if you can, how can B2B companies stand out and come up with something that's a little bit more creative, perhaps a little bit more unconventional, that would convince the so called prospects to attend the event?
I think it's all about, breaking out of that little box of fear. I think in marketing, we live in our ivory towers that we want everything to be perfect and we want to have a full campaign fully planned with, all, like you said, everything checkboxed before we release it to the public. And we like to stay within the boundaries of our industry. Some industries are a lot more like conservative. If you're marketing to marketers, we're one of the like we're a little bit more fun in general, but still there you kind of have to stay in your swim lanes too. You don't want to be too flashy for certain ICPs. But I think the stuff that is at the end of the day that is most successful is the marketing that takes a risk and is creative. For example, my company is guilty of this. We're a tech company with navy blue colors. You go to a conference, every single booth, navy blue, talking about efficiencies, AI, automation. Then there's like it all looks the same, correct? So how do you one like visually stand out, but also from the event, like you said, what's the hook? And I think it's doing something creative and out there that nobody would think of. Last year, one of the most successful events we did was we did something off of like the Step Brothers, and we hosted a boats party themed from Step Brothers, and totally out of connected to nothing we were doing from Step Brothers, but it was hilarious. People loved that, and it really got people to like hook them in. So I think being bold and creative, and that's a very broad term, but we all stay safe and are pitching all, like I said, we're all pitching efficiency and all of these buzzwords, and like saying what you actually do at the end of the day and then bringing something fun into it is what people want to do.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think mostly in B2B, people just don't want to rock the boat too much, right?
Exactly. And it's a little scary. And I think
Mm,
it's hard. Like there's internally, it's sometimes hard to pitch things that might rock the boat or things that like reference pop culture. But those are the things that people glob onto and think are hilarious. Or, telling a story with more unique swag, for example. Sometimes it's hard to pitch that somebody to see the vision, why somebody would want this. Um, but, taking a risk. And if it doesn't work, you pivot for the next one.
absolutely, absolutely. And you spoke a little bit about post event, right? So what happens after the event is done and done and dusted, so called. There's that phrase like the fortunes and the follow up, and part of that cold calling initiative I brought up earlier. That is also part of that follow up cadence, right? But what have you seen work in terms of following up with prospects once the event is done?
Yeah, there's definitely that like speed to lead, and that is still real. There's still studies that say, the person who does follow up the fastest is more likely to, get that lead at the end of the day. So I think, following up quickly is obviously one of the biggest, most effective ways, but how do you do it in not spammy, not overly salesy, way. There's different people who had different touches. There's people who didn't see you at all at an event. There's people who saw your booth, didn't stop by. There's people who talked to you. And how do you, have one cumulative strategy for that? And I think it's using that event as less of a, like you said, let me just cold call and blast all these people with my message and why my message is good for them, but use that as a touch point for how you can become more of a partner with them. Hey, and a casual touch point. I'm one for keeping it, not over professionalizing it and keeping it more casual. If I went to an event and someone randomly emails me and, said, hey, oh, I saw you at the event. We didn't actually get a chance to meet. We actually haven't ever met, but, I thought I was interested in this and thought you would like this. That resonates a lot more with me than a, 4 paragraph, uh, overly marketing graphic email that has the company values and all that stuff right away, because I want to talk to a human being at the end of the day. So using those post event touches as a way to show your humanness in this world of automated follow up, and to be more of a partner of hey, I saw you were at the event. We actually work with teams like you, and we help save them, whatever your value point is. We make their teams more efficient. If you were wanted to watch our webinar next week, thought you'd be interested. Very like light touch um, to keep it more educational and for those people, because it's overwhelming attending events and then being that ICP that gets spammed afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, like nobody wakes up in the morning saying, you know what I want to do today? I want to get pitch slapped by somebody that I met at the event, right? So,
Literally.
and I think another thing that I've seen work, and I know from my own experience, it's a little bit like in terms of it requires more effort. I'm just gonna say like the personalization aspect of it. I'll give you an example. Um, Met a couple of people last week at a networking event, and what I try to do in my follow up is I remember bits and pieces of the conversations that we had, right? Because each of them were different depending on their background, their professional role, where they're from, et cetera, et cetera. And one such individual, I happen to remember that he's Italian, right? So immediately I remembered a couple of phrases that I, pulled together in Italian, and in this movie I'm watching on Netflix that happens to be in Italian, and he kind of appreciated that I brought those up, right? So and it was a conversation starter. We didn't even talk about anything work related, right? In the email, for example, right? And then he booked a call with me, right? So things of that nature, and I do realize and I do appreciate that kind of approach does require a bit more work.
But it's worth it. And
Yeah.
one thing that we love to do is send handwritten notes to anybody who, either had a meeting at our booth or physically stopped by our booth that was memorable in that sense. Yeah, there's no follow up. There's nothing, no call to action from that note besides thanks for stopping by. It was really great having a conversation. I'm excited to continue our, professional relationship and learn more from each other. And that light is similar to what you said of, that personalized anything you can remember about that person, is always, I think, a super, again, it's a light touch point. So there's always this pressure too after events to, get these leads, meeting books, whatever you need to get them to that next step. And there's that, I think there has to be a little bit more of a light approach to that as well in certain to certain elements. Obviously, when someone's raised their hand, we're going to book that meeting. But for people who haven't, having more of that partner and casual approach to them, to be more of a peer with them versus selling something to them will pay off long term when now they've seen you at 2 or 3 events over the last couple years. And yeah, they weren't ready to talk to you last year, but now like you haven't pitched them for the last 3 years, but now they know what you do. So obviously that's more of a long term play, but that really helps build that with your brand.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So moving on to the next question, and I think it goes without saying that putting an event together, right, is a collaborative effort, right? It's a bit of I sometimes like to call it an ecosystem because it's not just the marketing people that are working on it; it's also the salespeople. It's getting perhaps even the salespeople to like get their clients to attend or go to the booth and what have you. So the question is, how do you how can B2B marketers work more collaboratively and strategically with sales regarding events? And how can the marketing team be held accountable?
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, the only every successful event I've ever had is because of the sales team. And I think one of the thing that working with the sales team does specifically is they help create the FOMO behind the event. They help create that buzz that this is a good event to go to, and customers are going to be there, prospects are going to be there, the people that everyone wants to talk to are going to be there. And usually they're the ones who have those relationships already built. Typically, if we're sending marketing blasts, like a customer or prospect might not know my name, but they'll know a lot of these sales reps' names. So using the existing relationships and trust that they have with their customers, with their prospects they've been talking to for months, to kind of say, like, oh, hey, I'm talking with other CTOs like you, and they're going to be here, and we worked with them, but having that open kind of network that the sales team usually has built is a huge way to leverage that. And I think strategically that just takes a lot of sometimes internal work of whether that's a weekly meeting to discuss events and what the sales team is responsible for and the marketing team is responsible for. But I think it's about tying obviously our goals are the same. We want to both book leads. We will both want to close deals from this event. That's unified. So that helps unify us to a certain extent. But to unify us even more, we could set, like, to hold marketing accountable to your specific question, we can obviously set specific, lead goals for an event that would, in theory, hold marketing accountable. But to a certain extent, I think you have to be able to work with sales and marketing, and like the handoff to sales is kind of what helps hold marketing accountable.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. Okay. So, Brynna, at this stage in the conversation, I mean, you provided us with plenty of stuff that's actionable, but like if there was somebody out there, a B2B marketer that finds themselves in this situation where they're most likely planning for an event, what are like 3 to 5 things that you would encourage them to do to leverage in-person events as part of their B2B marketing strategy?
I would think the first thing is what I touched on earlier, whether for post event, doing a handwritten note as follow up, I think is a huge thing that is really small to execute. We use, we have a direct mail platform that helps us do that, but that is something you can literally do by hand and mail out one by one. So it doesn't cost a thing. And it has a huge impact, and you're able to like have that personalization, like you were saying, put those little nuggets that you had with each person. So I think that's something huge that people can action on. Another thing I think is using the sales team to as a lever to pull for outreach, particularly for events. So I think, like you said, sometimes we'll send the marketing blast, we'll send a couple of nurture emails, throw them in an ad campaign potentially, and call it a day. But using the sales team to take that one step further to potentially, map out your like top 50 to 100 VIPs that you need to speak with at that event, and call them one-on-one, send them a gift ahead of time. That's one strategy we love to do, is that it can get pricey, speaking of budget, but talking about your top 50 50 people we want to speak to at that event. And what can we send them that's, themed for the location that we're going to, themed for the content of the event, or just, like a travel kit. There's a lot of kind of generic stuff you can send as well, but using a gift pre-event to kind of get that buzz going, I think is another huge strategy. Let's see. And then one more, I think at the events, one thing that's super great is, like I said, being unconventional at the event. So I, again, this is something the hill that I'll die on is I think we kind of over professionalize and over index to, I'll just call it boring. That is what it is, at these trade shows. So I think one of the things that's great about people at events is people love people. And when you let your team's personalities shine through in person, whether that's like what they wear within reason, obviously, what they wear, or, things that they can do walking around the conference. I think there's a lot of things like our sales reps, they're the key to the sauce because they have amazing personalities and that shines through in everything they do. So how can we get away from two people standing behind a booth in suits, talking about, like you said, pitching you this technology that everyone else is pitching you, to real people who are having real conversations, and authentic conversations at that.
Those are definitely some great tips. And it just reminds me of, I think it was an event that happened about 2 years ago. And this is one of the dangers, going back to your point, of not putting salespeople in the booth. I believe I passed by a booth that the two gentlemen, I think, were engineers, and they were clearly not very comfortable being on the conference floor or the trade show floor. So they just buried themselves in their laptops at the booth and avoided eye contact with passersby. That for me is like the worst way to well to run a booth, or to, in terms of having a presence at the trade show. It's almost like you're invisible, right? So it's going back to your point about like having the right people there and letting them shine. So having those salespeople that are going to make eye contact with you, that are going to walk the floor, so to speak, and not having these people there that would rather be, well, anywhere but here.
Yeah, and we always need technical
Mm.
expertise to a certain extent, but I think everybody, like like we said, they over index to this over professional, and being, I think, nervous to have personal conversations at booths and things like that. So how can we warm people up in that nature versus just hitting them with like, here's what we do and here's why it's important, and connecting that back to why everybody's there at that event for the first place.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. So, Brynna, based on your experience and observations, are there any trends that you see that are shaping the future of in-person events? And if yes, how can B2B marketers prepare for those changes?
I think one of the big changes is, AI in general. Obviously, everybody is utilizing AI in their marketing and sales tactics. And I think everything is getting watered down with AI to a certain extent. You see, outreach emails that look very similar. You can tell the tone is similar when it's something that's written by AI. You can tell when, like, a session, like the content of a session has been, all of the AI is just starting to dilute things. And so, as you're going into events and, you have that valuable in-person time and connection with somebody, it's so important. Like, I mean, I use ChatGPT daily. I'm not saying let's not use AI, but to use that as just like the starting point and overly personalize it to, your brand, who you are, because um, it just gets boring, like seeing the same messaging over and over again. And I think we're going to need to find a way, like messaging wise, but to differentiate yourself just in how you're sending emails, how the tone is, all that type of stuff. But, while you're actually there, if you look the same as everybody else, there's no point in going. So the budget is super valuable, and that time is almost priceless, I would say. So how can we make sure that, like the messaging that we're leading into an event with, whatever that our value is that we're leading with, that it is like extremely distinguishable just for our brand.
Absolutely, absolutely. Like with every other industry vertical, right? Like AI has crept into the event space as well. Um, and I, for one, would say there's a place and time for AI. I think marketers just have to become better at being able to draw the line in the sand and say, okay, this is what we should be using AI for, and this is probably where a more human intervention, for lack of a better description, comes into play.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
I did have one follow up question for you, Brynna, on in terms of trends. Like, where do you see things going in terms of like O2O? And I know that that's more like high level stuff, but having like the more digital aspect of the event play just as important a role as the physical in person aspect. So, for instance, apps, right?
Yeah, I think it's all going in the right direction of making an event more streamlined and more like, if, like I said, it's valuable time. If people are traveling, taking the time to travel, book a hotel, they shouldn't be wasting their time on um, things that they could watch online or watch in a video or could be sent in an email. No one wants to do that. They want, if they're going to be spending time in person, that session better have extremely valuable nuggets, or what you're saying to them at the booth, better be something that they haven't heard before. So I think we're going to see more digital events and in-person events kind of paired together, because I feel like that's the secret sauce of, we saw you in person, we met you, we talked, but you're not ready. We only met one time, we only talked for 30 minutes at the booth. We're not ready to see a demo of your product, or like, I'm in this kind of vast um, space of needing to know more, but like we've had this touch point, so that's good. I think there's a great combination of doing a digital event, with in-person events, and how can you use that technology to basically add on to that, the relationship and foundation you built in person.
Yeah, yeah, no, exactly, exactly. Okay. You talked about it a little bit earlier, but let's talk about metrics, right? It's one of these love it or hate it like topics. But how do you talk to people higher up about like, okay, we're making progress and we this event was successful. So what are some key metrics that you would advise B2B marketers to pay attention to?
Well, I think the most, key and glaring metric for everybody is obviously the ROI for each event. So, how much did we spend? How many quality leads did we get? Whatever that, however you define those. Did we get any deals that closed from that event? And that's obviously a very black and white way of looking at it. That's the main, my North Star metric for events is, looking at last year, what was the ROI, what we spent, and, along with that, if the ICP, is it this our tier one accounts? Is this our tier two accounts? Where does this fall in the market that we're hitting? And if it's, if it's 50% of the attendees are in our tier one list, but we're spending more. This event has 100% of our tier one attendees. Obviously, we're going to allocate more. So looking at the percentage of the attendees as well that really fall into your sweet spot, I think is a huge indicator. But one of the, I think metrics, this, I wouldn't even define it as a metric. This is more of I think it's too hard to define, but something that I really look at is, from each of those events, what good conversations came out of that? Like, did we talk to a couple of customers and we found out, a couple of trends that were happening? Or did were we able to be at the booth and talking to a customer and introduce them to another customer prospect who, they shared what they were doing, and now this prospect has booked a demo with us because of that conversation. So like, that is not a measurable black and white metric, but it's something that I really look at from events, is like a heat check of what were the really juicy things that we got, that we, from a specific person, that there's no way we would have gotten over a Zoom call, because it was unprompted and just came up naturally. And an event that has more of those natural occurrence and more of those natural, like, oh my gosh, we found out this and this, we need to put this into our marketing messaging, or the sales reps heard this and this, like product, we need to take this right, so an event that has way more of that feedback and nuggets to take back to our team. Again, like, you can't, that's not a hard metric that I'm taking to the executive team to say we should go yes or no, but it's a really good indicator for where those good conversations are happening, and also where you're going to get buy-in from the sales team. If they went last year and they heard so and so had the best conversation with their customer that led to an upsell, that led to this deal, like, everybody internally is going to be more excited about that event, pitch that event more, like, and that'll just bleed through.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. And it goes back to like, okay, well, how many new relationships were built, right?
Exactly. A very gray area. And in marketing, that's one of the things, more building, more of like a brand building activity, I would say, versus a, lead building activity. But how much of that was really impactful?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right. Okay, Brenna, please get up on your soapbox. This is the soapbox question. In terms of this topic, right, of in-person events, okay, what is the status quo that you passionately disagree with and why?
I think the idea that, like I kind of stated this earlier, the idea that you have to spend a lot of money to be successful at an event. You can be extremely scrappy, have an extremely small budget, and pull off a very successful event with a small team. So this idea that oh, we want to do events, we need to have a events team to do this, and we need to create a whole campaign, or like, I think it creates more red tape, and it's like, we need to cut the red tape and cut the fluff and just say, hey, we need to execute on this event. It's, just part of the day-to-day tasks that we're doing. So I think people, and within that, people create more of a need to like create a whole program for it, which, you do need to scale any program for events. Obviously, you need to have more of that foundation built, but sometimes you just gotta, like, let it rip and fly, and try something with the event, and if it doesn't work out, like I said, pivot. And I think there's too much of a fear around that.
Yeah, yeah, no, 100% agree with that. And it's something you brought up earlier in the conversation where you can do many more of these micro events. These are like more intimate. They're more targeted. They don't require as many resources. Um, I could be this could be slightly controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway. I found in my experience, at least, I don't know about you, but I find a lot of people that believe that it can only work if there are big events. They tend to be people that come from corporate or maybe bigger agencies because that's what they were used to, and they had those bigger teams at their disposal. And if they're suddenly in smaller outfits, they're like, oh, well, it can't be done, right?
Agreed. I think there is just that level of, kind of big company corporate culture that comes with events. And it's a lot different, I think, if you're at a startup versus that. You have, at a startup, you have the ability to be more scrappy and, like, cut through the red tape, like I said, and just have a fun, unique idea for an event. And you can throw that. Obviously, bigger company has to go through a lot more approvals. And that's where I think when you reach that step of having to sell it internally and pitch people internally of, like, this is why I want to do this event, this is why we should go here. It really helps when you have that buy-in, like I said, from the sales team, or when like, when you can say uh, these people are going to meet these people, and really give that, lay that foundation for who's going to see who, and like what the ROI is from that.
Exactly, exactly. Okay, here comes the bonus question, Britta. You ready?
All right, hit me.
Okay. If you were to pick a song to be the soundtrack of your life, what song would that be and why?
Oh my god, like the hardest
Sorry, did
question
I
of
throw
all
you off there?
time. Yeah,
Hmm.
the soundtrack of my life. Okay, like Florence and the Machine is one of my favorites. So
Okay.
I would do like The Dog Days Are Over.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of my favorite songs. It's a classic.
Okay.
It's I think because there's this that like song one, I love the melody in it, and I think there's like the melody of the song has this natural like rhythm and build. In my life I've learned like there's just these natural um day to day that is monotonous and it builds and it's great. And so I really like the melody, but also the messaging in that song of um like the dog days are over, there's always this continuous move towards the next step. And I think it's like every time you get through a dark phase, whether that's at work or personally, it's like, oh my gosh, this is behind me. Um but that just continues to happen in life, and there's always going to be the next hurdle to jump
Yeah.
over. So I think that's one of my I have to say that
I love it. I love it. Yeah, it's like highs and lows, right? So,
one. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Brynna, this has been such a great conversation. Thanks again for coming on the show and for sharing your expertise and experience with the listeners. So, quick introduction to yourself and how folks out there can get in touch with you.
Sounds great. I'm the head of marketing at Encapture. I work with financial institutions to help partner with them and automate their critical processes. About 10 years in the marketing space, working with revenue teams closely in the sales side as well. You can get in touch with me on LinkedIn, and would love to hear from you all. Thank you, Christian.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So, once again, Brynna, thanks for your time. Take care, stay safe, and talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Bye for now.